Expectation permeated the thick morning air over Horse Guards Parade, as if even the pigeons sensed something different. The stone-paved square, which has always been a theater for tourists, kids, and the inquisitive, seemed to pulse with a sharper edge today. A spectacle as old as the city itself was created by the sound of boots, the rhythmic clash of the Coldstream Guards' drums, and the gleaming sunlight reflecting off brass helmets. The ancient ceremony was set to undergo a test that no one had practiced on this Saturday morning. Sitting atop Clementine, the black Friesian mare whose enormous hooves pounded the cobblestones with an impeccable rhythm, was Sir Henry Brookfield, also known as Harry to those who knew him well. Harry's stance was the epitome of discipline. Chin up, back straight, eyes fixed somewhere above the heads of the crowd, and not a single twitch indicating the strain beneath his bearskin helmet and red coat. Under all of that pomp and circumstance, his heart beat in a counterpoint, a silent march that he kept hidden from the world. The Queen's Guard appeared nearly inhuman to outsiders, statues brandishing rifles, machines of pride and protocol, more show than force. Harry, however, was aware that discipline was a form of protection rather than a prison. The world was not predictable. It was his responsibility to maintain the boundary between chaos and order without faltering. Something unexpected would test that line today. The crowd of tourists gathered closer as the brass band unleashed yet another fanfare. The rise and fall of 100 languages, selfie sticks, camera flashes, and the sweet salty aroma of hot dogs and pretzels coming from local vendors all blended together in an odd, contemporary harmony. The parade ground itself was a patchwork of faces, with groups of teenagers laughing too loudly, elderly couples wearing sun hats, and kids on their parents' shoulders. However, Harry's world narrowed to the razor-thin edge of each second that passed and the muscles of Clementine beneath him. He was the first to sense it, a tremor running through Clementine's large chest. Her nostrils flared as she raised her head, as though a shadow had moved across the sun. Her ears pricked forward, focused on a far-off commotion that only she could detect. Harry made an ancient signal by giving his calves the smallest squeeze. "Go easy, girl." However, Clementine's rhythm paused for a brief moment before returning to normal. It would only have been apparent to someone with 12 years of experience. Harry, however, saw it all. He moved his eyes, but his head never moved completely, maintaining the appearance of motionlessness. He glanced at the crowd's periphery. There was a change. At the back of his throat was an odd smell. Perhaps oil or something acrid. It's hard to tell if it was genuine or just his nerves. Clementine stamped a bit too forcefully and snorted once more. The precision of the parade wavered. Harry received a quick, piercing glance from another guard. "Hold your ground." Harry nodded the least. However, a wave of anxiety had begun within. The guard's boots pounded the floor in time with the band's rendition of God Save the King. Harry looked over the queue. At that moment, he saw the girl, small, perhaps 8 years old, with pink, scuffed sneakers and pigtails. Her fingers twined in Clementine's shiny mane as she stood just inside the rope barrier. Her wide, half-frightened, half-awed eyes remained fixed on the enormous black horse as though everything else had vanished. Harry had witnessed children being captivated by the guards in the past. However, this was not like the others. The girl's other hand held a battered backpack like a shield against her chest. As though reciting a silent mantra, her lips moved. A couple, possibly her parents, fumbled with a phone behind her, taking pictures, laughing, and not paying any attention. After bending her head and sniffing at the girl's sleeve, Clementine suddenly jerked back and threw her mane with a violent shake. Harry tightened his hold on the reins. He looked at the closest guard, Wills, a young recruit, who looked at him curiously. Harry, however, remained silent, his gaze now focused on the throng outside the girl. Halfway into a no-stopping zone, there was a bright blue delivery van parked. Brit Fresh Logistics. The driver was a stocky man in his mid-30s with a ruddy face from stress. He sat hunched over the wheel, looking at something on his phone, then looking up and scanning the crowd. The back doors of the van were partially closed. A flicker of movement, a sliver of shadow. Harry felt his instincts tingle. Nothing was typical here. Clementine could feel his tension, but he told himself to relax and concentrate. Her breath came more quickly as she pawed the ground, each exhale creating a plume of mist in the clear air. The band's music abruptly reached a crescendo. A crush of bodies rushed forward in the crowd. The young girl almost lost her hold on Clementine's mane after being jostled. Harry dropped the mask for a heartbeat and leaned slightly. "Are you okay there, child?" he whispered, so softly that only the girl and the horse could hear. She gave him a nod, but her gaze quickly shifted back to the van. The driver killed his engine after starting it. There was a slight smell of burnt brake fluid. As the drummers in the band wheeled around, Clementine jerked once more, swinging sideways. For a brief moment, the parade's flawless geometry faltered. Harry could hardly hear the sharp, agitated voice of the captain as it boomed over the communications. He could only feel the horse beneath him, tense and coiled, and the little girl's eyes, which were focused on that van as though it were the source of all danger. Something was going to snap. Harry was aware of it. Clementine was aware of it. What it was, and how quickly he could respond to it, was the only question. Despite the tension vibrating through every muscle in his legs, Harry forced himself to keep his posture. Discipline was crucial in the Queen's Guard world. No emotion, no facial expression, and no movement unless ordered. However, training was unable to silence the alarm that was blazing through his nerves. Something was amiss. Below him, Clementine was no longer the epitome of ceremonial serenity. The large mare jerked her head, turning away from the young girl to look directly at the delivery van. Amid the city's concoction of food carts and taxi fumes, the faint smell of something oily and bitter floated on the wind. Harry's thoughts skimmed over potential outcomes. Hot metal, burnt brake fluid, and something he couldn't identify, a chemical note that wasn't there. He looked at the van once more, noticing that the Brit Fresh Logistics logo was partially obscured by rain and road dust. Undoubtedly a violation, but it wasn't the only one. During the parade, no van should have been this close. Harry's stomach rumbled. The line of guards moved with clockwork accuracy as the parade's captain yelled another command. However, Clementine obstinately refused to follow, planting her feet and shaking her head as the formation wheeled. Clementine gave a warning snort in response, then moved just enough to break formation as Harry squeezed the reins and whispered, "Steady, come on, girl," from the corner of his mouth. The crowd gave her a few looks as her hoofs made a sharp clop, and the closest officer gave her a grumpy glare. Harry's thoughts were racing. Clementine had been prepared for all eventualities, including fireworks, boisterous tourists, and even fictitious sabotage attacks. However, she had never, ever interfered with formation without a reason. For a horse such as Clementine, discipline was as natural as breathing. She must have sensed danger because she broke it now. He looked for the trigger. When he returned, the young girl, Ruby, he found out, had both hands gripping Clementine's mane. Harry had witnessed enough terrified kids to identify her stiff stance and shallow, fast breathing. The girl's eyes were fixed on the blue delivery van 20 yards away, not Harry, and her face was pale beneath her freckles. Harry lowered his voice to a faint murmur as he leaned in closer. "Hello, are you lost?" After flinching at his question, the girl looked up at him with her lips pressed firmly. She muttered, "He told me to wait here." Harry scowled. "My dear, who told you?" The girl paused and looked back at the van anxiously. "The van's occupant. He claimed to know my mother. In the back, he claimed to have something special for me." Harry felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked around for the girl's parents, but they were still taking pictures of the parade and giggling over the phone. Incompetent. Harry's jaw tensed beneath his bearskin hat's chin strap. Now trembling, the girl clutched Clementine's mane for support. He had to act quickly, but he was chained to his post by protocol. His career would have ended if he had abandoned the line without a good reason, but his instincts told him to keep going. He spoke in a steady, calm tone for the time being. "What's your name?" "Ruby," she muttered. "Where are your parents, Ruby?" She gave them a nod, but her gaze kept straying to the van. Harry followed her eyes and noticed that the rear door of the van was now slightly ajar. Inside, he noticed a shadow moving. Then he saw a second figure, a low-lying figure, as though in hiding. His flesh pricked. Clementine blew hard and stamped her foot once more. Pretending to adjust his stirrup, Harry leaned down. Actually, he was acquiring information, buying time, and waiting for a clue that he was dreaming. Rather, the driver of the van noticed him. With a nervous smile on his face, the man stared back without blinking. The sound of the drums filled Harry's ears, but all of his senses were focused on that van. He had to warn someone. Whispering through the static, he clicked his radio. "This is Sergeant Brookfield. Control. Code 32. East Side, possibly. I'm requesting private observation. Over." Someone had to be keeping an eye on him, but he wasn't brave enough to break formation just yet. The reply was succinct. "Yes, Brookfield. CCTV is locked." "Hold on." Harry let out a breath. Now at least there was a viewer. Once more, the procession changed direction, and Harry led Clementine to form a small arc, putting Ruby and himself between the van and the other people. Though it was barely noticeable, the movement created a valuable barrier between the girl and whatever might be waiting. As though relieved to be back in the van, Clementine appeared to calm down a little. Harry gave Ruby a quick look. "Is that man someone you know? Has he previously spoken to you?" Ruby began to cry silently as she shook her head. Her voice cracked as she attempted to speak. An intense, icy rage swelled inside Harry. The stone-faced mask and the discipline he had been practicing for years were on the verge of disintegrating. But he made himself maintain his composure. "Don't worry, Ruby. I'm present. Just stay near Clementine and me, okay?" All of a sudden, there was a disturbance behind them. The crowd became confused when one of the tourists stumbled. The driver of the van took advantage of the distraction by sliding out of his seat and heading for the back doors with his eyes darting. Harry's heart pounded. Every nerve in his body begged him to step in, but he continued to stare straight ahead. He glanced at the closest guard, Wills once more, who received the signal and gave a small nod. Now they understood that something was amiss. Without altering his ceremonial pace, Wills started to approach a nearby police officer in silence. Clementine, in the meantime, moved her weight, pushing Ruby away from the curb. The girl didn't fight back. Harry's thoughts were racing with possible outcomes. Could he get to Ruby in time if the driver moved? Would chaos worsen the situation? Or could he rely on the crowd to respond? The rear door of the van opened an additional inch. Just inside the gloom, Harry noticed a gloved hand holding what appeared to be a strip of duct tape. The sounds of drums and trumpets faded to a dull thud in Harry's chest, and the world appeared to shrink. Everything hinged on the following few seconds. A young girl's fear, a soldier's discipline, and a horse's instincts. Harry continued to wait, every muscle poised to erupt at the first sign of error. Time seemed to bend around Harry for a moment, making each second seem endless. The distant clash of drum and brass pulsated through the air, but beneath it all was a new, silent current, tension, electric and thick, pulsing through the parade ground like a low wire about to break. He attempted to focus on the horizon, as he had done hundreds of times before, but his instincts kept drawing him back to the young girl at his side and the escalating danger just beyond her. With one small hand still tangled in Clementine's thick mane and the other gripping her backpack so tightly that her knuckles were white, Ruby stood almost motionless. Her eyes were glossy and wide with unshed tears as she looked up at Harry. That expression spoke to him in 1,000 words. Fear, bewilderment, and the urgent need for someone, anyone, to step in and take charge. "Ruby, do you see your parents?" Harry inquired in a calm, even voice, as though addressing a frightened foal. He ventured a glance across the packed square. The girl's parents were present, but they were at least 30 yards away, laughing at something on the phone, utterly oblivious to the danger that was drawing nearer with each breath. Ruby took a deep breath. Her voice trailed off, uncertain. "They're right there. But the man in the van said he'd bring me to them." Harry had a quick mind. He needed to buy valuable time by finding a way to keep Ruby with him. He maintained his stiff, formal stance, which he had developed over a dozen years of discipline, but he angled Clementine to further protect the girl by placing the horse's wide body between Ruby and the road. Harry saw a glimmer of movement from the corner of his eye. The rear door of the van opened an additional inch, revealing a tall figure with his eyes searching and a gray hoodie pulled tight around his face. Harry recognized the expression immediately. A desperate, tense man watching for a lull in the crowd, a moment to strike. Clementine's ears pressed flat against her head. The Friesian let out sharp, short gasps of breath and tossed her mane. The horse received a silent cue to hold steady and be prepared when Harry's boots flexed against the stirrups. Beneath him, he could feel her muscles tense, each fiber alive and ready to follow his lead. He glanced at Wills again, who had moved to stand closer to the closest policeman. Good. One component is in position. Would it be sufficient, though? The driver of the van, Oliver Harding, whose name Harry did not yet know, abruptly stepped out of the taxi. His hands were shaking, his eyes darting, his movements jittery and unnaturally quick. He hovered near the open rear door, fumbling with a phone or a pair of zip ties in his pocket. Around Harry, the commotion of the crowd subsided, leaving only the sound of his own heartbeat and the girl next to him breathing shallowly. "I need you to do something important for me, Ruby," he said softly. "I want you to cover your head and drop behind Clementine's legs if I say the word duck." She nodded, a glimmer of trust replacing the fear in her eyes. At that moment, a family pushing a stroller collided with a group of tourists, causing a stir among the onlookers. Harry leaned down and held out a gloved hand to steady Ruby as she staggered and almost fell. He lowered his voice to a whisper. "Remain near, child. Here, you're safe." With a low, foreboding nicker, Clementine pawed the ground. Harry looked after her. The second man was now crouching in the back of the van, partially concealed behind a pile of boxes. He was tall, wiry, and had eyes that darted like an animal in a corner. He glanced up and briefly locked eyes with Harry before he ducked back out of view. Harry was adamant that this was no accident. It was a setup. 2 men, a scared child, and a distracted audience. Forcing composure into his voice, he clicked his radio once more. "Update, Control. There are 2 suspects. Potential attempt at kidnapping. Give prompt advice." His fingers shook on the microphone, but he forced them to stay steady. Every second mattered. As the clamor from the crowd increased once more, Ruby's parents appeared to realize that their daughter was no longer by their side. Her mother's high-pitched, terrified voice broke through the confusion. "Ruby, where are you, Ruby?" The father glanced around, his bewilderment giving way to mounting fear. Oliver moved away from the van before Harry could respond, yelling in a phony smile, "Hey, little one, let's go. Your mom is waiting for you here." Ruby stopped. Clementine lunged, obstructing the way with her wide chest as she stamped. Harry's thoughts were racing. Oliver might start a stampede with horses, kids, tourists, and mayhem if he attempted to take Ruby. He met Wills's gaze, and Wills gave him a barely perceptible nod before leading the neighboring officer to them. Ruby glanced up at Harry, looking for clues in his face. "Is he actually a friend of my mother?" Her voice was so fragile and tiny. Harry shook his head in a firm, low voice. "No, he isn't. Ruby, you remain right here with me." The strain tightened. Oliver paused, then made another attempt, louder this time. "Your parents are waiting, darling, so hurry up. Do you not recall me? I assured you of a unique treat." He made a forced laugh that sounded strange and menacing, cracking at the edges. Harry looked out into the crowd. The parents' faces were now devoid of color as they pushed forward while yelling their daughter's name. The first murmurs of panic filtered through the crowd as other tourists took notice. With her strong body poised to spring, Clementine adjusted her weight. Every muscle tensed, every sense sharpened as Harry's mind suddenly came into focus. He bent over Ruby and whispered in her ear, "You'll go straight to your parents if I tell you to run, okay? I will not allow anything to happen to you." Ruby nodded, tears finally streaming down her face, but she refused to back down. Wills alerted the first policeman, who began moving through the crowd while holding his radio. Harry caught Mason, who was still partially hidden in the van, reaching for something that was out of sight. Harry's world became extremely narrow. He knew the time had come when he saw Oliver shift his weight in preparation for a lunge. This was the purpose of every discipline session, every long night on duty, and every training exercise. Then everything burst into motion, and there was a breathless silence before the storm. Everyone in the vicinity could sense the energy that seemed to burst through the moment, even if they didn't know why. There was an understated tension in the crowd, akin to the anticipation of a summer storm. Harry felt as though his senses were razor-sharpened. The bond between him and Clementine, as well as the terrified child clutching the horse's mane, were more important than the ceremonial saber that hung heavy at his side. Discipline was the cornerstone of the Queen's Guard, but at the moment, all of that discipline was being forced into a single goal: protect Ruby and contain whatever was about to explode. Harry's gaze shifted between the anxious driver Oliver, the terrified parents squeezing through the throng, and the eerie shadowy figure hiding in the back of the van. Harry thought the band's music was just background noise to a much more dangerous drama, but it continued as if nothing was wrong, with brass notes drifting on the breeze. His voice was soft and low as he leaned in Ruby's direction. Clementine said, "Ruby, I want you to stay right here." The girl nodded, but she held on to the horse. "Don't move unless I say so." The pressure had turned her knuckles white. Harry used the reins to lead Clementine in a slow, purposeful arc, creating a barrier of horse and soldier between Ruby and the van in a smooth motion that appeared to be no more than a casual adjustment. Deep in tradition, the rest of the parade was hardly perceptible. Harry's move appeared delicate, almost instinctive, a brilliant combination of instinct and training. For a moment, it appeared as though everything was safe as the late morning's golden light glinted on Clementine's shiny black coat. Harry, however, was wiser. He sensed the warning energy that only a rider could detect, the vibrations in Clementine's chest. The mare's eyes darted between Ruby and the van, her nostrils flared, and her ears flicked back and forth. Harry maintained a rigid stance, making his face unreadable by the throng, but his right hand tightly grasped the reins, prepared to respond at the first hint of a genuine danger. The driver of the van paced uneasily, looking at Harry and then at his phone. The second man, Mason, though Harry was still unaware of his name, was moving around in the back, muttering to himself and occasionally looking out at the throng. Mason's intense focus on the girl caused Harry's blood to run cold. This was not a straightforward miscommunication. His bones sensed it. The sharp note of a bugle startled a child nearby, causing them to suddenly start crying. Voices rose, parents gripped small hands tighter, and the crowd moved. Ruby's mother called her name once more, louder this time, but the commotion drowned out the sound. Harry took advantage of the confusion. He gave Wills a small chin jerk as a signal. Already alert, Wills made his way through the crowd to two Metropolitan Police officers who were nearby. Harry leaned just enough to get his words to Ruby while maintaining a steady gaze. "You're doing fantastic, youngster." For a moment, the tension in her tiny shoulders subsided as she looked up at him. "You're the bravest one here." Catching on, Clementine dipped her enormous head to nuzzle the girl's arm while chuckling softly. For the first time since the van had shown up, Ruby even managed a small smile. Then Harry caught a glimpse of it, a glimmer of movement, from the corner of his eye. The van's rear door was forced open. Gloved and trembling, Mason's hand extended and placed a roll of zip ties and a strip of silver duct tape on the curb. All doubt vanished in that moment. This was a premeditated attempt at kidnapping. Harry's thoughts were racing. He talked as softly as he could into his radio. "Control, please. Image of tape and zip ties. 1 car, 2 suspects. Danger to the public." Every fiber in him was ready to act, but he maintained a composed demeanor and told the crowd nothing. The band hit their pieces last note. Oliver noticed his window as the final echoes subsided. He sprang forward, heading straight for Ruby. Harry swung off Clementine in one explosive motion, slamming between the girl and the van. With one hand firmly grasping Clementine's bridle and the other using the mare's strong body as a living shield, he dropped his free hand to his ceremonial saber. Oliver tried to push past Harry after he hesitated and his eyes darted. "Get moving, dude. She is my niece," he yelled, loud enough for a few tourists to hear. He uttered the lie, but his tone of desperation betrayed him. Harry remained steadfast, his voice low but unyielding. "Retrench yourself. Right now." Sensing danger, Clementine threw back her head and snorted deeply and angrily. Now that they knew something was amiss, the crowd started to disperse, with people stepping aside and bringing kids closer. Wide-eyed but secure, Ruby shrank behind the horse's flank. There was a thin line separating chaos and order at that moment. Mason ducked back inside the van and fumbled with something out of sight after realizing Oliver's plan was failing. Harry refused to move, keeping his body between Ruby and the suspects. He met Oliver's gaze, reading the fear, the calculation, the panic. He signaled Clementine to block any sudden movement by tightening the reins. The horse reacted immediately, taking a sideways step with the strength that only a cavalry horse with proper training could muster. The girl was safe for the moment. However, Harry was aware that things were going to get out of hand. Police officers' radios crackled as they started to converge in the crowd. "There!" Wills yelled, behind the van, and a number of tourists began recording, capturing the unimaginable moment on their phones. Harry took a deep breath. It was not the end of the drama, but for the time being, he had bought a valuable moment, and perhaps, just possibly, a chance for everyone to escape safely, by looping the reins, reading his horse, and following his instincts. Everything can change in an instant. The air grew so dense in that narrow passage between the crowd, the horse, and the blue van that breathing became nearly impossible. Every muscle twitch and indication of an upcoming move was tracked by Harry's mind as his eyes remained fixed on Oliver. The commotion of the procession had subsided into a faint, far-off murmur. The girl, the horse, and the 2 desperate men who had run out of options were all that mattered now. The tension was broken like glass by the abrupt collision of metal on metal. The Brit Fresh van's back door slammed against the curb after swinging open with a loud bang. With a strip of plastic ties in one hand and a roll of duct tape in the other, Mason lunged out, his face contorted with panic and resolve. Ruby screamed and attempted to hide behind Clementine's flank as he grabbed at her. With his arms extended, Oliver was already pushing past the tourists. "Ruby, come on over here." The crowd erupted in alarm as his voice broke through the din. A woman let out a scream. The sound of a phone dropping onto the stone was brittle and sharp. Harry shifted at once. Action was the result of years of disciplined drills. He spun Clementine's huge body into a wall between Ruby and the assailants by yanking her bridle. And enraged, the horse whinnied, rearing up just enough to scatter the men and push Oliver back a few paces. Under her hoofs, the ground trembled. "Remain back." Harry's voice cut through the panic as he yelled. For the first time, the Queen's Guard's power wasn't merely ceremonial. It served as a lifeline. Oliver, though, was desperate. Clementine snapped her head sideways and kicked him with her rear hoof in a fierce, warning manner as he attempted to circle her and reach for Ruby's backpack. Shards flew after the impact broke the van's side mirror. Oliver lunged again and grabbed Ruby's arm as Mason yelled and ducked, rolling across the cobblestones. Chaos broke out in the scene. Cameras flashed as onlookers reflexively began filming, tourists screamed, and parents dragged their kids away. Wills's cries and the commotion alerted the police, who struggled to break through the crowd. Harry's only concern amid the confusion was protecting Ruby. Leaping from the stirrup, he positioned himself between Oliver and the girl. With her eyes rolling white and her body tense, Clementine pressed in. Harry's tone had changed to one of absolute authority. "You'll be sorry if you let her go." Oliver tightened his hold on Ruby. As he attempted to pull her toward the open van, his face contorted, red with sweat and panic. "You're not getting it. She is accompanying me." Harry, however, would not permit it. Using his strength and experience, he grabbed Oliver by the wrist with one hand and pulled him back, forcing the man to let go of the child. Clementine lowered her great head, preventing anyone from reaching Ruby as she staggered to her knees in tears. Frantic and wild-eyed, Mason attempted to drag Oliver back toward the van. "Dude, forget it. Come on. Ignore the child." Oliver, however, could not listen any longer, and his despair turned to anger. He suddenly swung at Harry, aiming for his face, but Harry dodged and Oliver was hit hard in the chest. This was raw, real, and ugly. And the ceremonial saber was of no use here. Mason tried to pull Oliver away by grabbing his arm as he gasped and staggered. However, it was too late. With radios blaring, 2 policemen charged through the crowd and threw Mason to the ground. Oliver was apprehended by another officer and had his arms pinned behind his back. Shouts came from the crowd everywhere. Some were alarmed, some were scared, and some were just in disbelief at the violence breaking out in the center of one of London's holiest customs. Harry knelt next to Ruby and assisted her in standing up. In an attempt to ground her in the storm's eye, he whispered, "You're okay." Clementine softened the moment by nuzzling the girl's shoulder. When Ruby's parents eventually arrived, her mother sobbed as she embraced her daughter. As the officers marched Oliver and Mason away, the father's face tight with relief and rage, he glared at them. Waves of the aftermath spread. With their cell phones still up, tourists were whispering to each other, recording every moment. The appearance of order was restored when the guards, shook but professional, closed ranks. Minutes before a stage for ceremony and tradition, the parade ground was now the scene of a near catastrophe that was narrowly avoided. Harry glanced down at his uniform, which was filthy and ripped from the fight. He briefly questioned whether he had disregarded all of the book's rules. He knew he had done the only thing he could when he saw Ruby, her tears already drying in the warmth of her parents' embrace, and Clementine, breathing steadily but hard. Brushing gravel off his knees, he stood and looked directly into the senior officer's eyes. The man gave a silent, respectful nod. "Sergeant, we'll handle it from here. You performed well." The voice of the parade captain came over the radio as Harry got back on Clementine. "All units, go back to posting." As if nothing had happened, the city's antiquated machinery began to tick again. Resume protocol. However, the appearance of safety would never be the same for everyone who had seen it. Clementine was led back into formation by Harry. The world witnessed a silent, obedient, and stoic Queen's Guard. Beneath the uniform, however, a silent pride blossomed as his heart continued to race with adrenaline, knowing that he had chosen the right side when ceremony and danger collided. The parade ground, which had just been throbbing with ceremony, was now pulsing with adrenaline and chaos. Harry's gaze returned to Oliver as the police raced to restrain Mason. Oliver shook off the officer's hold and fled for the van, his eyes blazing. The world became a single, sharp focus. Clementine's hoofs scraped the stones as she tensed under Harry's touch, seemingly reading his thoughts. With a well-honed motion derived from his 12 years in the guard, he swung back into the saddle, saber by his side, boots finding the stirrups. "Remain here." Harry's tone was unarguable as he yelled at Ruby and her parents. However, he was already planning ahead, figuring out routes, potential hazards, and the erratic surge of people. Oliver gunned the engine and yanked the van door shut. Tourists and street vendors were strewn about as the car lurched forward and fishtailed past the curb. Clementine sprang into action as Harry dug his heels in, capturing everyone's attention with her thunderous hoofbeat. The Black Friesian charged onto the mall, the broad boulevard between Buckingham Palace and Horse Guards Parade, causing the crowd to split in fear. With the horn blaring and tires screaming as Oliver accelerated, the van swerved dangerously through the sea of onlookers. Clementine was a partner and a war horse dressed in contemporary attire, not just a parade horse. Harry leaned down and whispered to her, and she answered with unadulterated strength, cutting the distance incredibly quickly. The world was a blur of hats and waving arms as the air ripped past Harry's face. Harry was already locked on the van, reading every swerve and every flick of the brake lights as sirens started to howl somewhere behind. The pursuit spilled onto the main street. Harry noticed Mason in the passenger seat of the van, frantically pointing to Oliver with a look of panic on his face. Oliver's eyes darted from the mirrors to the road and then back to Harry, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. A cyclist leaped from his bike and cursed as the van veered dangerously close to a line of parked cars. Harry was familiar with the streets. Pressing Clementine forward, he led her parallel to the van while navigating the tangle of city traffic, where horns and yells were booming everywhere. Both locals and tourists dispersed, with some hiding in doorways and others holding their phones up to their faces to capture the drama as it happened. The van jolted violently when it struck a pothole, and Oliver almost lost control for a second as the back wheel skidded. Harry recognized his opportunity. He drew Clementine closer with a sharp whistle and a flick of the reins, bringing the mare's large body within inches of the passenger door of the van. Mason waved his arms as he rolled down the window. "Leave! Return!" His voice was hoarse with fear as he yelled. Using his ceremonial saber as a tool rather than a weapon, Harry reached for it. He aimed for the valve and brought the blade down on the front tire with practiced accuracy. The tire burst into a spray of compressed air and rubber as the steel clanged sharply. A group of schoolchildren clinging to a fence came dangerously close as the van jerked and swerved violently, scraping against a lamppost. Oliver fought the wheel and screamed. The engine stalled and the van slammed to a stop. Mason was the first to bail out. falling into the street before he clambered to his feet and fled. Desperate to get away, Oliver followed, running into the tangle of alleys off the mall. Without hesitation, Harry got off, landing hard with his saber still in hand. "Remain." He gave Clementine the order, and the horse remained motionless, opening her nostrils and observing the mayhem with perceptive, alert eyes. Boots banging on the sidewalk, Harry followed the men. Mason ducked into a narrow alley, limping and gasping. Harry followed closely. "Police!" he yelled. "Quit running!" Mason persisted, stumbling over garbage cans before tripping and falling against a brick wall in a heap. Harry grabbed Mason's arm and pulled him to his feet before he could orient himself. "Game over," Harry snarled as he handed Mason off to two officers who arrived, exhausted but determined. "Look for evidence in the van. This isn't just a case of kidnapping gone wrong." Oliver, who had run down a different alley, attempted to vault a fence but fell to the ground after catching his leg on the top rail. He struggled and crawled away, but before he could go very far, another officer came and pinned him. Radios, sirens, and the chatter of onlookers narrating what they had just seen filled the street. Heart thumping, Harry jogged back to Clementine. With a gentle nicker, the ever-steady mare said, "Job's not done yet." He stroked her neck, allowing the adrenaline to leave his body. He surveyed the scene, Ruby and her parents surrounded by police and paramedics, Mason and Oliver handcuffed and under control, the van now blocked by police cars, the crowd still muttering. Spectators recorded and took pictures, and their voices rose with rumors and retellings. When the officers opened the back doors of the van, they found not only the anticipated packages but also a spooky stash that included zip ties, duct tape, a half-written note with an address, and what appeared to be a crude map of a school playground. With a thump, the truth hit home. This was not a haphazard snatch but a carefully orchestrated crime, broken only by a soldier's instincts, a horse's senses, and a few moments of courage. Harry's eyes were filled with gratitude as he turned to face Clementine. With a gentle touch on her neck, he said, "You saved her, girl. We worked together to complete it." Slowly, the city, the crowd, and the sound of the parade came back, but everything was different. For a few minutes, the bravery and discipline of those who refused to turn away had determined the fate of an innocent child as the world came dangerously close to catastrophe. The tension in the air around Horse Guards Parade persisted even after the immediate threat had passed. After swiftly securing the area, police officers surrounded the two suspects in handcuffs and roped off the van with yellow tape. The band had stopped playing. Tourists gathered in small, nervous groups, some sobbing quietly while others eagerly broadcast the drama to distant relatives who were finding it hard to believe. Harry felt as though the world was reduced to the area of sun-drenched pavement where Clementine stood, her nostrils flaring and her hoofs planted, as though she was the only one who could keep chaos at bay. Mason and Oliver were pushed up against the van by the officers. Breathing heavily and looking down, Mason refused to look at anyone. Oliver spat curses as he was searched and handcuffed more firmly, his face a mask of defiance and defeat. The press, with cameras and microphones hovering just outside the cordon, had questions, just like the Metropolitan Police. However, Harry's attention was on Clementine, Ruby, and ensuring that the immediate trauma didn't worsen. For her part, Clementine continued to be the unsung hero. The horse took over the investigation in a way that no human could have anticipated. With a broad, muscular body, wide eyes, pinned ears, and slightly exposed teeth, Clementine stopped Mason's attempt to jerk away from the officers and run. She stamped a hoof, the sound sharp and authoritative, and nickered fiercely and rumblingly. After a moment of surprise, the officers clenched their hands around the inmate. "Remain away. Do you not see that I could be crushed by that thing?" Panic rising, Mason yelled. Harry calmly replied, "Then I'd suggest you stop moving," with one steady hand at his side and the other on Clementine's bridle. He spoke at a level tone while maintaining eye contact with the men. Neither she nor I take threats well. Oliver, on the other hand, collapsed against the van. The battle was over. He blinked in the sunlight, watching the crowd with a drab gaze. Harry caught him muttering something under his breath, possibly out of regret, anger, or simply tiredness. Clementine moved precisely and deliberately around the suspects as the officers completed handcuffing both men and started searching the van, her bulk acting as a psychological and physical barrier. With her body language sending a strong message that this was now her territory, she blocked any way out. Reporters and even tourists naturally avoided close contact. Spools of duct tape, plastic zip ties, gloves, a packet of candy with the school's logo, and a detailed sketch of a playground with annotations in an enraged red marker were all visible when a sergeant widened the van's rear doors. One officer pulled out a tiny digital camera and flipped through pictures, including pictures of the school gates, a schedule, and even kids playing during recess. As the truth of the suspect's scheme became apparent, the temperature in the room appeared to drop a few degrees. With trembling hands, Ruby's parents held their daughter close while whispering comforting words. Ruby's tiny body was filled with silent sobs as she clung to Clementine's neck and covered her face with the horse's mane. Harry put a hand on her back as he knelt next to her. "Ruby, you did a fantastic job. Now it's over. They are unable to harm you." Sensing the child's distress, Clementine lowered her head and gave her a gentle nuzzle while blowing warm breath into her hair. The girl calmed down a bit and at last raised her red-rimmed eyes to Harry. "Thank you. And thank her too." Harry managed a tiny smile as he said, "You can tell her yourself. She knows more than you realize." The blue lights of additional patrol cars and an unmarked detective sedan soon joined the commotion, and police radios began to crackle. With a notebook in hand, one detective stepped forward. "Is it, Sergeant Brookfield? Could you describe what you saw to us?" Harry clarified, emphasizing Clementine's role while delivering his story in calm, straightforward language. As he talked, additional officers pieced together a timeline by going over the CCTV footage from surrounding buildings. The evidence became overwhelming in a matter of minutes. This had been a planned, deliberate grab that could have ended tragically if it hadn't been for a guard's quick thinking and a horse's instincts. Throughout, Clementine stayed vigilant, and everyone could feel her presence. A news crew came up, focusing their cameras on the massive horse. "Is it accurate to say that she personally stopped the suspects?" a breathless reporter inquired. Harry just gave a nod. "She is more than just a ceremonial horse. She has a partner. We cannot read people the way horses can. She was aware of the problem before any of us did." Harry saw Clementine observing the suspects with keen, perceptive eyes while the evidence was being bagged and statements were being taken. She positioned herself between Mason and Oliver and Ruby, head up, as if to challenge them to try anything different, whenever they even moved. At last a detective came back. "Something much worse might have been avoided by you and your horse, Sergeant Brookfield. There is sufficient evidence to support several charges, including attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, and possibly more." "Thank you." Harry nodded, feeling both relieved and worn out. Clementine pushed against his shoulder and exhaled deeply. The knowledge that discipline, training, and a horse's intuition had made all the difference was all that remained as the adrenaline that had gotten them through the chaos began to fade. A smattering of applause erupted from the crowd as police led the suspects away. It was hesitant at first, but it soon grew sincere and appreciative. A living testament to courage, loyalty, and alertness, Clementine stood tall in the sun, her shadow lingering on the old stones. A hush deeper than the previous fanfare replaced the chaos as it slowly subsided from the parade ground. With police cars pulling away and blue lights flashing subtly against Westminster's elegant buildings, the crowd started to thin out, with awe and relief reverberating through the crowd. The square itself seemed to release tension as the stones relaxed, and the sky above grew brighter and wider as the crisis subsided. Sweat was still running down the horse's neck as Harry and Clementine stood there, the sloppy aftermath of real-life heroism taking the place of the ceremony's crispness. With a serious expression on his face, the parade captain came closer. Harry briefly questioned whether he had gone too far and violated protocol beyond forgiveness. However, the captain stopped, surveyed the scene, and gave Harry one of his few respectful nods. "Sergeant Brookfield, you fulfilled your obligations. The safety of the general public comes first. Let's now restore order to the guard." Those were powerful words. Harry gently led Clementine back toward the Queen's Guard main line as the final police van roared off, Mason and Oliver in the back. The crowd was more subdued now, almost reverent, and the square was quieter. Those who watched did so with the kind of awe that comes to people who have seen something uncommon and real, rather than the light-hearted curiosity of tourists. Harry paused to assist Ruby and her parents. The young girl's eyes were red but dry, and she had finally stopped shaking. Her voice was low as she turned to Harry. "Will she remember me?" She gestured to Clementine, who bowed her enormous head and gently blew into Ruby's outstretched hand. For the first time since the ordeal started, Ruby grinned. Her mother gave Harry an impetuous hug while choking back a thank you. Her dad just nodded, his eyes bright. Harry patted Clementine affectionately and remarked, "It was her, really. The true hero is her." After exchanging appreciative looks, Ruby's parents escorted their daughter away, with Ruby stopping every few paces to give the kind black horse that had stood by her side during her most vulnerable moments another look. Harry went back to where he was in the formation. As her body acclimatized to the proud, erect stance required of the Queen's Guard cavalry, Clementine's ears flicked forward. The rest of the troop straightened with Harry back in line, their discipline returning, the calm and structure brought by the sharp edges of their training. The ceremony was not as opulent as it had been, but it was somehow more profound for everything that had transpired, and the band played a softer song. For a long time, Horse Guard's parade was shrouded in quiet. Now smaller and more reserved, The crowd appeared happy to simply observe the resurrected pageantry. There was a tangible feeling that something significant had occurred, something that would be discussed for years to come but didn't neatly fit into the day's schedule. Harry glanced at the bandleader from his perch atop Clementine, and the leader nodded subtly. The square was once again filled with music as the band marched with a stately gait. In addition to recording the spectacle, tourists held up their phones to record the return to order and the silent declaration that life and tradition would continue. A metropolitan policeman walked over and stopped next to Harry. "We will require your complete statement later, Sergeant Brookfield. Commendations are being discussed." After he paused, he continued, "And your horse? She deserves one too." Harry grinned. "I'll let her know, but she prefers apples to medals." With a smile, the officer disappeared back into the thin crowd. A few kids approached the rope barrier after being inspired by Ruby's courage. A young boy, perhaps 5 years old, gazed up at Clementine with wonder. He assured his father that she was not frightening. "She is courageous." Harry was quietly proud when he heard the remark. He took a tiny apple out of his pocket, a treat he had saved for Clementine. The horse took it carefully from his palm, crunching happily as he held it out. The audience gave the little performance a round of applause, which was a happier, lighter sound than before. The ceremony was soon in order. The guard, a representation of restored dignity, stood erect and unwavering. With their voices slowly rising to the lively hum that typically filled the square, tourists resumed taking pictures. For those who had seen the earlier mayhem, seeing Harry and Clementine in perfect shape again was a comfort, a reminder that bravery and order could coexist. Ruby and her parents waited for a final opportunity to say goodbye by loitering close to the square's edge. With her parents right behind her, Ruby sprang forward and ducked under the rope barrier when the moment was right. She put her arms around Clementine's neck and spoke in a hoarse-only whisper. Harry gave her a kind salute and grinned. With her fingers following Clementine's mane as she moved away, Ruby said, "I'll never forget you," in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. Before the family reintegrated into the departing crowd, their ordeal behind them, their gratitude evident in every gesture, the girl's parents gave Harry one last thank you. Harry felt the weight of the day ease into a sort of calm as the band's final notes faded and the ceremonial march continued toward Whitehall. Harry let himself think that perhaps, just possibly, some stories do have a happy ending when Clementine gave a gentle snort and shook her mane. Under the London sun, the square stood serene and proud, having been purified by the tenacity of its guardians. Horse Guards Parade belonged to the heroes, both human and equine, who refused to turn away, regardless of what the world threw at it tomorrow. Harry remained on top of Clementine, allowing the rhythm of her breath to steady his own, long after the square had cleared of the day's crowds and the sun had started to cast long, golden shadows across the cobblestones. The world had become quieter. The echoes of the parade lingered in memory, mingling with the sounds of the distant city, a Westminster bell, the soft murmur of traffic, a lone siren disappearing into the night. The lessons of the day, however, blazed bright beneath the surface calm. 2 detectives walked up, their voices low as they went over the evidence again, verifying information for their final report. Harry caught bits and pieces: planned abduction, CCTV, public intervention. The reality was nearly too much to take in. A kid nearly got lost, a school playground was targeted, and it was all stopped by a horse's instincts and the quick decisions of a guard who had been trained to remain motionless rather than break formation. Harry rehearsed every detail in his mind as he walked Clementine slowly along the Horse Guards parade edge. Why had Clementine been the first to recognize the danger? The solution was partnership, a relationship based on mutual respect and trust that could not be replaced by drills or parades. It was more than just training. He vividly recalled the first indication that something was amiss, the moment Clementine had stumbled out of line. He had doubted himself at the time, fearing the consequences of breaking protocol. But now that the adrenaline had subsided and the stakes were clear, he was glad he had paid attention. Clementine and other horses were trained to ignore sudden noises, crowds, and fireworks. No amount of training, however, could impair a Friesian sense of smell or her capacity to pick up on changes in a person's heartbeat, an adrenaline rush, or the pungent smell of heated brake fluid and fear. Harry came to the realization that rules were meant to be broken occasionally. The strict rules of the Queen's Guard were to never react, never show emotion, and never leave formation. However, he now realized that discipline was more than mindless obedience in a way that went beyond any drill or ceremony. It served as the basis for making decisions about when to act and when to hold. Even at the expense of tradition, the uniform served as a platform rather than a cage, a privilege that came with the weight of duty for public safety. As they gathered at the edge of the parade ground, out of the tourist's line of sight but within earshot of the other officers, he found himself discussing this with Wills, a rookie guard. Still flushed from the chaos of the day, Wills remarked, "You did the right thing. Sarge. Never have I seen anything like it. Weary but proud, Harry grinned. I haven't either, Wills. Remember that discipline is more than just remaining motionless. It all comes down to being prepared and understanding when to cross the line in order to protect someone. Two officers nearby were still going over the CCTV footage. Harry heard someone mention the timeline. From beginning to end, 8 minutes. When the public noticed, police closed in and guards arrived. This is what we should be teaching people, according to the textbook. See something, say something. Harry nodded, considering the cultural significance of those remarks. There was more to the safety net than uniforms and radios in a city as big and crowded as London. It was the culmination of every watchful eye and worried voice in the throng. Instead of just watching today, the crowd pointed, called for assistance, recorded, and moved aside to allow the police to move. A collective endeavor bound together by mutual and systemic trust. As though listening, Clementine moved her ears back and forth, feeling the strength beneath her coat and the warmth of a living being who had trusted him enough to defy authority. Harry reached down to caress her neck. He recalled Ruby, the young child who had held on to Clementine's mane and who had placed greater faith in a stranger wearing a scarlet coat than in the deceptive claims of a criminal. He hoped that as she grew up, she would remember the courage she found in herself and the animals she loved, in addition to the fear. Harry learned the same lesson. He came to see that it was not the flawlessly planned marches or the medals shining on his chest that characterized him as a guard. They were the moments of doubt, the flashes of uncertainty, and the decisions to follow instinct even when all the rules told you not to. He understood that being an emotionless statue was not the goal of the Queen's Guard. It was about keeping your heart steady, your eyes open, and your judgment sharp so that you could serve and protect others. Ceremonies were important, but they were superficial. The real legacy they carried was what was underneath: the partnership, the discipline, and the willingness to take action. The world was silent and respectful as Harry escorted Clementine back to the stables as the day turned to twilight. Whispering about the hero horse that had rescued a child, the stable hands greeted them in wonder. Slowly removing Clementine's saddle, Harry massaged her and gave her a crisp apple, which was her favorite snack. Appreciating her bravery and the opportunity to be there for her when it mattered most, he allowed her to rest her head on his shoulder for a considerable amount of time. Outside, the city continued on, its traditions unbroken, its pulse steady. However, the lesson was set for Harry, Clementine, and all those who had seen what had transpired that morning. Never be scared to act morally, even if it means breaking formation, stepping forward, or standing out for the sake of something bigger. Have faith in your training and your instincts. As night fell over Westminster, the deserted parade ground was illuminated by street lamps. Flashes of panic, the thundering hooves of a horse that wouldn't stop when it mattered most, and the echoes of drumbeats were all remnants of the day. Harry always had time to think during the quiet hours following the ceremony, but this time was different. The lessons of courage, discipline, and instinct were more loud tonight than any bugle. It was quiet in the barracks. As the adrenaline faded to exhaustion, guards polished their boots and made low-pitched jokes. Harry found a peaceful spot near Clementine's stall and watched the large Friesian eat her apple while occasionally shaking her head in pride. Already, word had gotten out, through the police radios, throughout the regiment, and soon, probably, throughout the nation. In order to save a life, a Queen's Guard and his horse had defied custom. Leaning against the stable door, Harry allowed the sounds of the city to fade away. He recalled every detail, including Mason's frantic scurrying, Oliver's desperate glare, Ruby's shaking hand in Clementine's mane, and the sound of duct tape striking the curb. More than anything, though, he recalled the decision: to pay attention, to act, to cross the line when obligation compelled it. Some of the younger guards walked by, their eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. One recently graduated from training stopped to inquire, "Sergeant, how did you know? How did you know something wasn't right before anybody else did?" Harry grinned, not with pride, but with a hard-won comprehension. Your body may know something before your mind does. You have faith in your senses, your instincts, and your horse. Although protocol is crucial, it is only half the solution. Knowing when to exercise your judgment, even if it means doing something that no one expects, is the other half. Later, Harry was in front of a tiny camera, filming a quick message for a public video. His voice was steady despite his clean uniform and tired face. Standing beside him, Clementine's ears perked up at every strange noise. He looked directly into the lens and remarked, "Discipline isn't a chain. It's the platform that enables us to act morally. It teaches us not only to obey but also to be prepared to act. Acting also occasionally entails having faith in your partner, your horse, or your instincts. That is the true meaning of service." He paused to allow the words to sink in, remembering everyone who had been behind ropes that day and who might eventually have to make their own choice. Speak up if you see anything. Don't hesitate to take action if you sense a problem. Sometimes a single voice that refuses to ignore a warning, or a split second, can make the difference between safety and disaster. In its most basic form, the video's final scene, which featured Clementine, now out of uniform, standing silently in the late afternoon sun with Ruby by her side, speaks louder than any words. As she gave the horse another apple, the girl's laughter reverberated, her fear giving way to wonder and thankfulness. "Trust your instincts. Sometimes, your instincts come with 4 legs and a mane," was written in bold on the screen. Harry returned to the stables to watch the guards complete their evening duties, which included cleaning the tack and exchanging anecdotes. The parade captain even made an appearance, placing a hand on Clementine's side. "Harry, she has brought pride to the entire regiment. You two have." The statement was straightforward, but it had a profound meaning. Harry gave a nod. "Thank you, sir. I simply completed the task at hand." "She completed the remaining tasks." The captain grinned. "We are here for that reason. The public is invited to the ceremony. The times in between are when courage is needed." The skyline of London sparkled in the darkness outside. Tomorrow, everything would be different. The city's heart would continue to beat, tourists would swarm to the Horse Guards parade, and the guards would stand silent and proud. However, something fundamental had changed for those who were familiar with the story and those who would hear it in the days ahead. Harry hoped Ruby and all the children who watched would remember not only the danger but also the rescue, the human-animal bond, the courage to defy authority, and the faith in a higher wisdom that transcends the law. He wanted the lesson to stick. Everyone who lives in this city needs to be vigilant, kind, and brave. Harry gave Clementine one last treat before he left. With her head resting on his shoulder and her breath warm and comforting, the horse leaned in. He reflected on the things he had said on camera, about action, discipline, and intuition. He was quietly certain that some of life's most significant events come as a surprise and call for presence rather than perfection. Harry made his way home with steady steps and a lighter heart as the last of the lights in the stables went out. Along with the day's events, he brought a lesson for everyone who would listen. Have faith in yourself when the time comes. Have faith in your partners, your training, and your intuition. Because there are instances when acting morally requires being the one to move, take action, and refuse to remain motionless. Additionally, a soldier's companion horse can also be a hero in certain situations. The tale concluded as it should, with a child safe, a bond intact, and a city reminded that bravery frequently takes unexpected forms. Additionally, the following words continued to appear on the screen as the last credits rolled. Like, sign up. Anyone who still thinks the Queen's Guard just stands motionless should hear this story. And keep in mind that intuition can appear like a horse at times.